So my name's Graeme Murrell. I'm an IT Principal Officer at the Council, and I head up our digital services team. We manage the Kirklees website, the My Kirklees Forms platform, and have oversight of the quality, including accessibility, of the whole Kirklees digital estate. So all of our websites. Um, One of the areas of work that we are most passionate about is digital accessibility. And digital accessibility is defined as everything being published being accessible to everybody, regardless of disabilities and regardless of assistive technologies they may use. One of the things which I became aware of uh, a couple of years ago was the sheer amount of accessibility expertise that we've got inside the council. But I then contrasted that with is that accessibility expertise also around outside of the council, particularly given that we signpost people to community and voluntary sector websites for so many services these days, an increasing amount of services. And well, it didn't feel right to me that we keep this accessibility knowledge locked in the council. In fact, I was really passionate to start to give a helping hand to anybody who required it, to ensure that we move towards what I like to call an accessible level playing field in Kirklees. Um, Hence, I put together my tips for creating a usable and accessible website, and began to offer myself to run sessions like this to help people to achieve that aim of making things accessible and therefore making things inclusive for everybody. A little bit more about me. I lost sight in my right eye in 2000 or 2001. It's so long ago I can't remember. Um, I then had surgery on my sighted eye the following year, Valentine's Day, not the ideal timing, but to save the sight in my sighted eye. And I began to have serious issues with my sighted eye back in 2019. Thankfully, they've settled down now. But that situation of having accessibility requirements myself, of going through periods when I've found it difficult to read, continuing to find reading from print difficult, is just one of the things which makes me very, very passionate indeed about getting this right for everybody. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to present a bit of a whistle-stop tour of, I think it's 12 things that can be done on every website to improve how usable and accessible they are. Don't just think website though. Think emails, think documents, think all digital communications that you share with everybody. Because although you may be sending to somebody who you believe may not have any difficulties interpreting the email that you send, for instance, they may share that with somebody who may have difficulties interpreting that. And so there are 12 things that we can all do to maximize the accessibility of our digital communications, and almost all of them are really simple. It's with accessibility in so many ways. A lot of it is just quite simply that people don't know. Once people do know, so much of it is actually very, very simple to implement. And by implementing it, you'll be providing inclusive communications to all. So what I shall do, I'll share my screen uh, and I'll then run through the various things to do with providing a usable and accessible service, do feel free to interrupt with a question at any point. I am eminently interruptible, and I would rather you interrupt me at the point when a question surfaces than you forget the question towards the end of the session. I'm not always able to see who's got their hand up while I'm delivering. So Lisa, if you notice people with their hands up, can you give me a shout and let me know?
Yes, that's fine, Graeme. I'll definitely do that.
So if you just bear with me, I'll do a share. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yes,
Terrific. Marvellous. Okay, so the session is about tips for delivering an accessible and usable website. And I always like to start with this, what I call the digital access ramp. It's a really good way to get people to understand exactly what it is that we're talking about. And I give an example of you being invited to occupy a new building. It's got lots of modern desirable features, but there are 6 steps to the entrance and it has no access ramp. Because it doesn't have an access ramp, some people are excluded from entering the building. And I'm sure all of you are thinking right now, I'm not moving in yet. I'm not moving in until access is granted to all. Well, let's just shift to the digital realm. And an inaccessible website doesn't offer a digital access ramp to allow everybody to access your online service provision. So the first thing to think about when you're designing a website is always design for mobile first. Almost without doubt, most of your site visitors are using a mobile device. We regularly audit mobile usage on the Kirklees Council website, and in September last year, 66% of visitors to our website were using a mobile. 31% were using a desktop, and only 3% were using a tablet. So by designing for mobile first, that means that you maximize your reach and the ability of people who are using those mobile devices to be able to view your website in an easy to read and easy to navigate manner. My next bit of advice is don't use an accessibility overlay. There are lots of companies out there which would encourage you to use an accessibility overlay. For those of you who don't know what an accessibility overlay is, you sometimes see them at the top of websites, and they give you a range of tools to change the appearance of a website so that it fulfills your accessibility needs. But there can be some areas of difficulty. An accessibility overlay might actually make it more difficult for assistive technology users to use their technology on their own device. They also offer a sticking plaster rather than an actual fix for your website. Your website remains inaccessible unless someone chooses to turn the overlay on. And the UK regulation monitoring body has specifically said that they don't consider overlays when they're monitoring to see how accessible a website is. There's also been some interesting research in America based on legal cases where an overlay has been implemented on a website in which the majority of people with disabilities and who use assistive technology say that they prefer to navigate sites which don't have an accessibility overlay. You'll notice here that I've got a couple of hyperlinks to more information. I will be sharing a link to this information after the session, and I would encourage you to have a look at the the other information that's available on the other sources that are linked to. The third bit of advice is make sure that you use the correct heading structure. This is really, really important because if I think in terms of a screen reader user, a screen reader user needs to know what the structure of a page is. If you don't use the correct heading structure, it can either confuse the screen reader user or it can give the wrong information about the content of a page. If I think about, say, a Word document, because all of this information in general also maps onto, or most of this information also maps onto document creation. If when you create a Word document, to make your headings, you just make things bold and bigger, that's great for people who can see that it's bold and bigger. But for a screen reader user, it's just another paragraph. It's not a heading or a title at all. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that every page has a heading level 1 title tag. That tells the screen reader user that that's the title of the page or the document. And then make sure that you don't skip headings. So if you have a page with 6 subsections, each subsection should be given a heading 2 title. If any subsection has a subsection, I don't know whether that's the right terminology, but we'll go with that. The subsection should be given a heading level 3. If there is a further level down, that should be given a heading level 4. So make sure that the structure of your pages and the structure of your documents makes sense. Going back to the example of a Word document, if you have a 56-page Word document and the subheading on page 52 is more information, or is something which is key to the information that the person looking at that document right now wants to know. They don't want to be forced to read the preceding 51 pages before finding that that's there. They want to get the measure of the document with a swift look through the headings. And that's the kind of behavior that screen reader users and users of other assistive technology will display. Skip to content. This one's really, really important when people are navigating a website. Every website has a menu across the top of the website. Some may have a menu down the left-hand side, but in general, websites have a menu across the top of the website. Every page that you go onto on the website also has that menu at the top of the page. Sighted users can easily see that menu is there and easily make a decision to drop further down the page to start reading the body of the page. A screen reader user doesn't have that luxury, and so by default, a screen reader will read the top menu every time a person goes to a page on your website. You can help the screen reader user avoid that by creating a skip to content link. And what that does is when they click on the skip to content link, it skips them immediately beyond the menu to the body content, which is what they've come to the page to read. The worst example I've come across not having skip to content is a website where every page had 186 hyperlinks that were read out to people before they reached the body of the page. Imagine the pain of that when trying to get to the content of the page that is what you've gone there to read.
Sorry, Graeme, can I just ask a question?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. Do you have an example of the skip to content? I think I know I can visualize what you mean, but I don't know if you have a visual example, and maybe if
What
whether it's done or not done. I don't mind.
what I can do, I'll share that after the meeting in
Yeah.
an email, which will include a link to this page.
Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, I can easily give an example of that.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, Graeme, I was going to ask the same sort of thing about the accessibility overlays, because I assume you're meaning the sort of thing we've got on our website, where it's like a little icon near the top that you click on, and then you get an expanded menu of different accessibility tools. But yeah, it'd be nice to see what that looks like that you're referring to.
Right. Okay. I'll have a look at your website
Thank
after the
you.
session
Yeah.
and let you know about that.
All right. Thank you.
There are a couple of useful links here which are worth having a look at. The overlay fact sheet in particular is signed up to by hundreds of accessibility specialists around the world and gives the case for not implementing overlays on a website. I can't mention any specific overlays because the companies that provide overlays are highly litigious and at least one accessibility expert has lost their house and had to resort to crowdfunding to be able to afford the legal case against him for mentioning a specific accessibility overlay company. One of the questions about those companies is also, are they the kind of people you want to do business with? So next up is color contrast. Color contrast is something that is so often got wrong, actually, particularly by designers. Designers really are quite attached to pastel colors, say white text on a pastel color, as an example. Lots of people can't read that. I've seen white text on a light yellow background. I can't read that. Um, black text on a dark grey background. I can't read that either. And so getting color contrast right is absolutely key to making sure that you maximize the ability of those people who are sighted to be able to read your content. So the key there is to make sure there's always sufficient color contrast between text and background colors. And I've given a couple of links here. One is a color converter, so you can drop your colors into there to get those colors defined in the hex definition that's used for colors on websites. And the other one is a really good quality contrast checker that tells you whether the two colors that you're considering combining fail or pass on accessibility. So I can see one person's got the hand up. I can just see a WK there, so apologies, I
Hi.
can't see people's names.
Oh, it's okay. Would it affect those using assistive technology as well, the colours, or could it potentially? Or
It depends on the technology, but
okay,
for a screen reader user, for instance, no, it wouldn't. A screen reader doesn't know what color things are. But for anybody with, for instance, low vision, color contrast has a big impact, and it can also have a big impact on other people, perhaps with neurological conditions, who struggle and have to exert extra effort to get the measure of and understand what's being said on a page with colour contrast. Does that answer your question okay?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
That's terrific. So the next one, and this is something that so many websites get wrong. Use descriptive hyperlink text. The first thing is make sure links always make sense out of context. So have a look at any given page on your website. Find what the links are. If those links weren't on that page, would they make sense? What a screen reader user may choose to do is they may just choose to either tab through the hyperlinks and not read the content surrounding them, or they may choose to list the hyperlinks in alphabetic order to get the measure of what's being linked to from the page. So hyperlinks always need to make sense out of context. Read them out. Do they tell you where they go? If they do, you've succeeded and you've got good quality hyperlinks. If they don't, that indicates that you've got some work to do. And one of the examples of a poor hyperlink is click here. So if I was to just say to you, here is a hyperlink and it's called click here, you can't tell me where it goes because all it says is click here. But if I was to tell you that there's a hyperlink called Kirklees Council Culture Strategy, you could tell me that it goes to Kirklees Council Culture Strategy. So don't use click here or here links. And again, that's exactly the same in emails and exactly the same in documents. You're not giving many people enough information with click here for them to know where that click is going to take them. The other bit of advice for hyperlinks is to use distinct hyperlink text for every link. And again, returning to click here, you'll see pages that have 15 links called click here. A screen reader will believe that all 15 links go to the same place because they all have the same hyperlink text, but in actual fact, they don't. So make sure if you've got 15 hyperlinks on a page, every hyperlink should have distinct hyperlink text. That tells the screen reader user that each hyperlink is different. So getting hyperlinks right is absolutely key to making sure that that everybody is able to understand what the things are that you're linking to from a page. Now I know hyperlink text is something which or using descriptive hyperlink text is something which everybody isn't necessarily familiar with. Has anybody got any questions on hyperlink text?
Can I ask a question about something related but slightly different?
Yeah, certainly.
We've started using QR codes quite a lot instead of just links. Are there issues around QR codes?
So QR codes are great for having on posters and other locations. The difficulty with QR codes is that a person who isn't sighted can't point the phone at them.
Yeah.
Because they don't know exactly where the QR code is.
Yeah.
There is a more accessible form of QR code which has colours around the QR code.
Yes.
And that type of QR code, I don't know how it does it, by the way, but that type of QR code, you can basically point your phone anywhere in the region of the QR code and it will pick it up.
That's interesting because I weirdly I noticed that they used those on Strictly this weekend, and I wondered what it
Interesting.
was, and I was going to try and find out what it was and why it had colours round.
Right,
So that's
right.
good to know. Thank you,
Interesting.
Graeme.
Yeah, yeah. On on printed matter, because QR codes are mainly a thing that you would use on printed matter.
Yeah.
QR codes are a great thing to have, but I would still probably always accompany the QR code with a written hyperlink as well.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Thank you.
So the next one isn't completely an accessibility thing, but it's also about how easy it is for people to track along the sentences that are written on your site or in your emails or documents. So this is to use plain English capitalization and use an easy to read font. Plain English capitalization is slightly different from the capitalization that I grew up using. If you have a title, for instance, or a subheading, for instance, this one, what I probably would have done prior to using plain English capitalization is I would have capitalized in the term use plain English capitalization and an easy to read font. I would have capitalized use, plain, capitalization, easy, read, and font. But capitalizing that much can make that heading more difficult to read for some people. And so minimizing capitalization to just those times when it should be used, the full real name of organizations, the full real name of policies or projects, people's names, place names, and not capitalizing the rest of a heading helps people to read what's been written. In addition to that comes don't use all capitals. Again, for some people with reading difficulties, all capitals can be difficult for them because there's not sufficient difference between letters for them to easily read something written in all capitals. And then, as I mentioned, and I've obviously to hammer the point home on here, I've capitalized the first letter of every word in a bullet point called "Don't capitalize the first letter of every word." And the Plain English campaign has really good guidance on capitalization.
Is there an accessible font that you would recommend, Graeme?
So in general, online, on screen, sans serif fonts are more accessible than fonts with serifs.
Yeah.
Arial is a good accessible font. Helvetica is a good accessible font. And I don't know if you've noticed, but Microsoft have changed their default font.
They have, yeah.
To a font called Aptos.
Yes.
And that's been done largely for reasons of accessibility.
Interesting. Thank you.
What I would say is, particularly on a website, I wouldn't get too lavish on the different fonts that you use.
Yeah.
On a website, you don't define a single font for areas of pages. You define the primary font, then you define a secondary font for those devices that don't have that primary font. Then you define a tertiary one for those devices that don't have that font.
Yeah.
But Ideally, you want to be using a font where you've got a really good idea that pretty much every device worldwide has got that font.
Yeah.
If you go for a lesser used font, you run a higher risk of your website not presenting as you expected to present in many people's browsers.
Yeah, that's a good tip, that. Yeah, but again, it's designers like to use quirky fonts, don't they?
They do.
Make it unique.
They do. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
So next is use well-written alternative text. Alternative text, often called alt text, is hidden from view, and it's used for images. And it describes to a screen reader user what that image is or what the intention of that image is. I am going to warn you, writing good alternative text is a bit of a dark art. So it's not just about telling people what the image is. It's also about considering context and considering whether it's important for the screen reader to know that there's an image there and know what the image is. So if your image is an icon that illustrates a point, you can almost certainly mark it as decorative, which means that the screen reader will ignore it. But if your image is a photograph of trees in Greenhead Park, and it's important to draw attention to the fact that there's a photograph of trees in Greenhead Park, then use the alt text to tell screen readers about the trees. Tell them what type of trees they are, tell them what colour they are, tell them if there's something specific about the positioning of those trees. What are the things that you are communicating to sighted users with that image that it's important to communicate to everybody? A really good example of poor quality alt text was given to me recently by Gavin Ford Williams, who used to be head of accessibility at the BBC, and he was working with a top quality whiskey brand. Their communications consultants spent a lavish amount of time writing the copy that would sell £2,000 whiskies to people. That copy was accompanied by an image, a really nicely taken and lit image of one of those whiskies, and the alt text was beige drink in a glass. The alt text should do as much as the copy around it to indicate context and get people as excited as they are about whatever it is as the image gets those people who can see it. So write alt text that is useful to the readership that relies on it. Take into account the intention of an image and its context on the page. Don't start your alt text with the image of. Screen readers tell the user they're being told information about an image. Carousels or sliders. So these are those things where you have a series of images that scroll from left to right. There's some interesting research into carousels, which is actually most site visitors don't interact with them, but it's the prominent element on many site homepages. One of the reasons why people don't interact with carousels is they look like adverts, and people don't interact with adverts. Not very much anyway, because they're adverts. So there's some research that indicates that if you have a carousel with, say, 4 different items in it, 99% of only 1% of people will interact with that carousel. And of that 1%, only 1% of those will interact with usually the first element on the carousel. So you've got a 1 in 1,000 hit rate for the most prominent part of the carousel, and then it tails off after that. If you do choose to use a carousel, do make sure its transition speed isn't too fast. Moving elements on a page can be quite a distraction to many visitors to your page, particularly people with the specific conditions that are triggered by movement or flashing. For that reason as well, make sure it can be paused, because some people need it to be paused because their attention on the text that is also on the page can be difficult for them to focus on text on the page when there's something also moving. And also because of that research that indicates that people don't interact with a carousel, don't use a carousel as a navigational element, you're going to lose a fair amount of your audience. And I've linked here 3 different links which give some information about carousels. One's quite funny, and one's just got a great title: "Sliders suck and should be banned from your website." Designing safer web animation for motion sensitivity is a really useful one for understanding the impact that animation can have, or the negative impact that animation can have on some people. So another top tip is make phone numbers clickable. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you do a Google search for an establishment and on your mobile device, and you then find the information about that, there's immediately a hyperlink to phone that establishment. You just need to click on it and you're already phoning them. You can do exactly the same on your website by putting just a small amount of code in that means that those people who are using a mobile device can click on the phone number and immediately call that number. That's so helpful to people, particularly people who may have a mobile device but may not be highly skilled in using the device. So for them to have to, say, write a phone number down, they may not be able to write a phone number down. To then open their phone app, then key in the number, then phone it, you're giving that person all sorts of barriers to actually being able to access that telephone service. Documents. Documents are an enormous issue. I could give a whole hour session on documents, but what I'll say quite simply is, if you have to publish documents, make sure they are accessible. The first thing to say is, as soon as you're considering publishing a document, actually consider if that's the right thing to do. Is a document the right format? If it's only a page or 2 pages long, make it into a web page instead. If it's a 78-page policy, a document is almost certainly the right way to go. There are many reasons for publishing things on websites instead of documents. One is Google drops documents in search results because it just says that's a print format file. It's not the right format for online. And another one is, even when a document has been made accessible, it's still difficult to navigate on a mobile phone. A PDF on a mobile device requires constant pinching in and out, navigating up and down, navigating right and left. It's a difficult process. It's particularly a difficult process for someone who may have tremors in their hands, someone who may, for whatever other reason, find interacting with their phone screen difficult. They're particularly difficult for people who with low vision, who may require things to be zoomed into. And unlike web pages, which well-made web pages will resize to take into account the device that they're being accessed on, a document doesn't do that. So always, as soon as you have a document, have an immediate rethink. Is the document the right format? But we do have guidance on creating accessible documents, and we do have guidance on a best practice, which is completing document properties of all documents. Next bit of guidance is avoid frequently asked questions. This one often comes as a surprise to people, as a piece of advice. But a couple of things that frequently asked that aren't often thought about with frequently asked questions. They usually present a random list of things which may or may not be frequently asked. They're an organisation's attempt to think, I think these things are going to be frequently asked, therefore I'm going to put them in a list of frequently asked questions. And how many times have you been to a page on a website of frequently asked questions to find 35 questions, and it's a pain finding the information that you want? They are also, and this leads to, they're actually one of the least liked formats by consumers of online content. They're one of the most liked formats by content creators, but they're not by those people who consume them. A really good example from a few years ago was to do with Microsoft, Microsoft certified engineers who, when they were helping people with a variety of things, were constantly calling into their service desk to get guidance on how to do things. The guidance was already published, but it was published in frequently asked questions, and they found it too prohibitive to have to look through a list of frequently asked questions every time they wanted guidance on a specific subject. So what Microsoft did was they rewrote everything using concise, well-structured headings and subheadings, and concise, smaller, targeted pages which had the information that those Microsoft engineers needed about specific subjects. Calls from engineers to the service desk went down. Use of the online content went up. Another thing that you often find with frequently asked questions is you've already answered that question in the main body content somewhere on your website. So you're duplicating. And now, every time you need to make an update to your website, you need to remember to update both the core content and the frequently asked questions. So now you've just doubled your workload. So frequently asked questions, and again, we've got more information about why we don't publish frequently asked questions, and also some simple suggestions on writing for the web about putting things under clearly defined headings, structuring your content well, and that kind of thing. We do have more information. So our website standards and guidance, it's written primarily for providers of content for the council website and also for managers of other council websites. But there's also a lot of information that is really useful to anybody in Kirklees or elsewhere who is looking for guidance on accessible documents, on writing good quality content, on creating accessible hyperlinks, and many other areas which help to do this thing of providing a usable and accessible website. And again, just to reiterate, when reading that word website, always also think about a usable and accessible document. Many of these guidelines are just as applicable to documents and to a usable and accessible email. Many of these things are transferable to those and therefore to the other methods of digital communication that you use to engage your audiences.
Thank you, Graeme. We've got a question in the chat from Becky. Are PDFs accessible?
By default, no. You always have to do some work to make a PDF accessible. Most PDFs began life as a Word document, and so my advice is always to make that Word document fully accessible before making it into a PDF. Roughly speaking, in general, making a Word document accessible is relatively easy. Making a PDF accessible is a great way to grow old fast. It's not pleasant. But a PDF by default isn't accessible.
Just follow up that question, because sometimes if we've done some training on a PowerPoint, I will send it out as a PDF afterwards. So is it better to leave it in PowerPoint?
It's actually the same issue as a PDF generated from a Word document. The PowerPoint presentation needs to be made accessible. So it doesn't necessarily matter whether you send out the PowerPoint or the PDF. Both can be inaccessible. So Microsoft have got great guidance, by the way, on making Word, PowerPoints, anything else that you create using one of the Microsoft Office suite on making those accessible.
Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got a quick question, Graeme. Is there anything particular we need to know about website navigation? Are there any particular tips about that?
Let me, I'll stop sharing my screen because that's the end of the presentation.
Yeah.
So website navigation, I would always keep it as simple as you can. Always make it user focused. So when I think about the Kirklees website, I don't think about our website. I think about their website. The website is there for the people who use it.
Yeah.
So that leads to avoiding jargon, use the terminology that those people use. It also leads to giving highest profile to those things which people are looking for on your website. So organizations typically believe that some things are really important for people to know, but in fact they're not. They're important for the organization to know.
Yeah.
You know, there's dull grey documentation that I read that I wouldn't expect the public to read. So that thing of giving highest profile to those things which people are coming to the site for also maps onto those things which people are coming to a page for. And we use a method, the technical term is top tasking. So top task everything. What are the top tasks that people are coming to the website for?
Yeah.
Once you've got your website sections, what are the top tasks that people are coming to that section for? Once you've got an individual page, what are the top tasks that people are coming to that page for? You only have one top task, by the way, per page. But if you have 6 things to say on a page, what's the big ticket thing that should be first on the page? It's not the introductory text. Most people don't read that.
Yeah.
It's if you're talking about benefits, it's either how to get advice on benefits or how to apply for benefits. You know, the thing telling people something later on, this is the legislation about this. In actual fact, you might end up thinking, I don't need to tell them what the legislation is about this because most people aren't interested. So that thing of top tasking when you're looking into your navigation is also a really good way of finding out what actually drops off the bottom and doesn't need to be said on the site.
Yeah. Thank you. Evangeline's got her hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question about like printed resources or leaflets or that type of thing that would be a document to begin with, but it's more about promotion and grabbing someone's eye, but then also balancing that with being accessible. Do you have any like tips or comments around, or anything from your experience where you've tried to balance those two things?
I must admit, I'm going to fess up. It's not usually me who ends up balancing it. It's usually our graphics department. But as an example of what they've done is we did used to have a corporate colour palette and then kind of bodges that were made to change those colours to accessible colour contrast combinations on the Kirklees website and other online locations. Graphics have been really busy and created a new corporate colour palette that is fully accessible across all media, including printed media. That's what I would always recommend for any and every organisation, to get a single corporate colour palette that will work across all media, because something that is illegible due to poor colour contrast on screen is also illegible on paper. It's just that there's a legal, well, for those of us in public sector organisations, there's a legal requirement since 2018 for that legibility to be good online. There isn't yet that legal requirement on paper, although there is still the Equality and Human Rights Act and the requirements for reasonable adjustment that can be applied to other media.
Thank you. And just thinking that there's quite a lot of people in this call that are external and may not have a graphics team in their organisation. Is there any where you'd kind of suggest going for a bit further advice on that colour palette, or is that built into things like Publisher or Canva, or is there anything that could be of help to people who don't have that team to support them with that?
What I've done in the page which I'll link to is I've included a link to the WebAIM colour contrast checker. So that's
Okay.
web accessibility in mind, and you can enter any two colours to that, and that will tell you the accessibility of those colours. So
Perfect.
yeah, most people here won't have a graphics team kind of behind them. But what I would say is once you've got your online colour palette right, map that onto your printed colour palette.
Yeah.
So you now know that you've got it right in both contexts.
Brill. Thank you.
Yeah, Evangeline, just to follow up on that, when we were doing the promotional stuff for this session, that was something that I had to work on with Graeme, and I used Canva, and it was really easy to do using that colour checker. It just meant that, like, I mean, you can see behind me, we've got this particular red that we use for our branding for TSL. That I would normally use that as the starting point for my colours. That I had to use a darker colour. I mean, there wasn't a massive difference, but you know, I know that there's a difference. But for picking up again on what Graeme just said, I think if we're reviewing our branding, I would potentially consider just going with that darker colour, full stop. And we also tend to use it in combination with a grey generally, but I would potentially going forward move to a black, so that we've, as Graeme said, you know, we've got that already, and then it's not an issue, is it?
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's been a useful introduction to the subject. Hopefully people have found it useful, and hopefully you'll all be able to go away and have a look at the websites that your organisations have, and start making some changes. As I said at the start of the session, so many of these things are actually very, very easy to do. Rewrite a few hyperlinks, change colour contrast here and there. That extra thing of top tasking is a really good one about usability. Creating easy to read titles, using well-structured alt tags. All of those things are actually quick wins. Well, changing color contrast may not be where you've got a specific brand applied, but once you've gone through the rebrand to make sure that what you're producing is fully accessible, then that's an easy one to implement. So hopefully that's armed you all, got you excited about digital accessibility and providing inclusive services for all.